Okay, in this video I'm going to go through the cranial nerves very quickly, talk about their functions. So there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. They are actually structures of the peripheral nervous system. So they are peripheral nerves. They are called cranial nerves because they arise from the brain and brainstem, but they are structures of the peripheral nervous system. So I'm just going to go through each one and talk about its basic function. And I'm just going to type it because my handwriting is a nightmare. So cranial nerve number 1 is known as the olfactory nerve. And this is important for olfaction, sense of smell. So the olfactory nerves actually run up from the nose and synapse in these structures known as olfactory bulbs, which transmits the impulses to the olfactory tracts. You don't need to worry about any of that, but here they are. Cranial nerve number 2 is known as the optic nerve, and this is important for vision. Okay, so you need these to see. So there are 2 optic nerves. They come from each eyeball. They actually cross at this area known as the optic chiasma. Again, you don't need to worry about that. Just know optic nerve, vision. Cranial nerve number 3 is the oculomotor nerve. And this has a couple of functions. So it has a somatic nerve supply to most of the muscles of movement of the eyeball, to the extraocular muscles. Okay, so it supplies most of the muscles that actually move the eyeball itself. It also has autonomic nerve supply. And it's going to supply what are known as the ciliary muscles and the pupillary muscles. So the ciliary muscles actually change the shape of the lens of the eye to focus light on the retina, and the pupillary muscles are going to change the diameter of the pupil by changing the iris. So the oculomotor nerve has a couple of important functions. Cranial nerve number 4 is known as the trochlear nerve, and this will supply a muscle known as the superior oblique muscle. And this is just another extraocular muscle that helps to move the eye. Cranial nerve number 5 is known as the trigeminal nerve. It's called the trigeminal nerve because it has 3 branches. It has an ophthalmic branch, a maxillary branch, a mandibular branch, but don't worry about that. It's going to supply the muscles of chewing. So somatic nerve supply to the chewing muscles, or the muscles of mastication. So these include things like the temporalis and the masseter and the pterygoid muscles. It also has a sensory component, so sensation of the face, so sensory innervation to the face. Cranial nerve number 6 is known as the abducens nerve or the abducent nerve. This is going to supply a muscle known as the lateral rectus muscle, and this is another extraocular muscle to help move the eyeball. It moves the eyeball laterally, or abducts the eyeball. So cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6, they all act to move the eyeball. Cranial nerve 3 also has an autonomic component, so some really important nerves here. Now, cranial nerve number 7 is known as the facial nerve. And the facial nerve is going to do lots of stuff. So, somatic nerve supply to the facial muscles. So, the muscles of facial expression. Autonomic nerve supply to lacrimal glands for crying, for tear production. Lacrimal and salivary glands. Sensation of taste. And this is mostly on the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. And there's some other sensory components too, but these are kind of the big ones of the facial nerve. And paralysis of this nerve is known as Bell's palsy, which can kind of mimic signs and symptoms of a stroke. So cranial nerve number 8 is known as the vestibulocochlear nerve. and this is going to be a sensory nerve, so important for hearing and equilibrium. So it has two branches, has a vestibular branch and a cochlear branch. The vestibular branch is for equilibrium, and the cochlear branch is for hearing. Cranial nerve number 9 is known as the glossopharyngeal nerve. This is another nerve that has somatic function, autonomic function, as well as sensory function. So it somatic nerve supply to a muscle known as the stylopharyngeus. I don't really care that you know that. Just know that it has a somatic component, meaning it supplies a skeletal muscle. It also has an autonomic component, autonomic nerve supply to the largest salivary gland known as the parotid gland. Okay, the facial nerve also supplies salivary glands. It supplies what are known as the submandibular and sublingual glands. Also sensation of taste, mostly the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. And it also senses changes in pressure, so innervation to baroreceptors and chemoreceptors in the carotid arteries. But don't worry so much about that. I mean, these nerves really do a lot of things, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible because we have bigger fish to fry. Cranial nerve number 10, of course, is the vagus nerve. Very, very important nerve. So, again, somatic component. It will control muscles for swallowing, similar to the glossopharyngeal nerve. It also has a huge, this is by far the most important parasympathetic nerve. This it has an autonomic component for lots of stuff. Lots and lots of things. So, like I said, pretty much it provides autonomic parasympathetic input to almost all of the organs in the thoracic and the abdominal cavities. Okay, so just know that. So this is a major component. It's also going to actually have a sensory component for taste. Actually, most of its sensation for taste is on the epiglottis. A lot of people don't realize we have taste buds way down there, but we do. And it's also going to innervate baroreceptors and things like that, much like the glossopharyngeal nerve. So the biggest difference between the glossopharyngeal nerve and the vagus nerve is that the vagus nerve is going to supply autonomic innervation to pretty much all of the muscles or all of the organs in the thoracic and abdominal cavities. So the vagus nerve is very, very important. It's also important for speech, for the larynx, controlling the larynx, and a number of other things, but the vagus nerve is very important. So cranial nerve 11 is the spinal accessory nerve. This is going to be somatic innervation to the sternocleidomastoid muscle and the trapezius muscle. And then finally, cranial nerve 12 is going to be the hypoglossal. And this is for controlling the tongue. This is going to be kind of off the video a little bit, but it controls the movements of the tongue. Okay, so just know the 12 cranial nerves, know their basic functions. Again, I told you to recognize that cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10 have autonomic components, so just know their basic functions. And as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.